Alright, let's get into it. Number 15. The hagfish. A shark closes its jaws on a pale eel-like body, drifting near the seafloor. It should be an easy meal. Instead, in less than a second, the water around its head turns to thick, ropey slime. The slime floods the shark's gills, and it cannot breathe through it. The shark thrashes backward and swims off, and the animal that caused all of it simply slides away, unharmed, into the dark. That animal is the hagfish, and it has no jaws of its own, no eyes. Only a scatter of light-sensing spots where eyes would be, and no bones at all beyond a small cartilage skull. It feeds on carcasses on the seafloor, rasping flesh loose with a tooth-like structure on a retractable tongue. And it can even absorb nutrients straight through its skin. On looks alone, it is one of the strangest living things in the ocean. The number is what makes it stick. A single hagfish, threatened once, can turn about 20 liters of seawater into slime almost instantly. Roughly a full bathtub of goo produced by 1-foot-long animal in under a second. Glands running the length of its body release coiled threads of keratin along with a mucus compound. And the moment that mixture touches seawater, the threads uncoil and the mucus expands, and the whole cloud locks into place before a predator can react. Now picture how old that trick actually is. In the Francis Creek Shale of Illinois, paleontologists found a fossil called Myxenichila siroca, dated to roughly 330 million years ago. And it already looks like a modern hagfish down to the body plan. That is about 95 million years before the first dinosaur walked the earth. In 2019, researchers at the University of Chicago described a second fossil, Tethymyxine tapirostrum, pulled from rock in Lebanon and dated to about 100 million years old. This one had preserved something no hagfish fossil ever had before. Actual residue from its slime glands. The defense system you just watched, Stop a Shark, was already fully built, while Tyrannosaurus rex was still tens of millions of years from existing. Everything around the hagfish changed. Oceans emptied and refilled. Mass extinctions rewrote what was allowed to survive. Armored fish the size of buses vanished, and through all of it, this soft, boneless, eyeless scavenger barely changed at all, because it had already solved the one problem that mattered. Nothing wants to eat something that turns your throat into concrete. For decades, scientists could not even agree where the hagfish belonged on the family tree of vertebrates. Its bare-bones body looked like the most primitive branch alive, but genetic testing kept grouping it instead with lampreys, as a more recent offshoot, not an ancient leftover. The two kinds of evidence only lined up in the years leading to 2019. Once fossils like Tethymyxine gave researchers an actual timestamp to check the DNA against. So next time you see footage of a shark backing off from something that looks like a boneless sock, remember what you are actually watching. A body plan that predates the dinosaurs, running a defense system it perfected while the biggest predators on the planet were still going through their first drafts, and one that has not needed a single upgrade since. A slime trick strong enough to choke a shark is impressive. The next animal on this list survives by doing almost nothing at all, and it might be even harder to kill. Number 14. Triops. After a hard rain, a puddle can look completely empty. Give it a couple of days, and something starts swimming through the mud. Something with 3 eyes and a body built like a horseshoe crab that shrank in the wash. It is a triops, and if you set it beside a fossil dug out of a quarry in Germany, you might not tell them apart. Even though that fossil is somewhere around 200 million years old. The animal wears a flattened shield of a shell over its head and back, and underneath it, as many as 60 pairs of leaf-shaped legs beat in a slow ripple, doing the work of swimming, breathing, and feeding all at once. Its name comes from the 2 compound eyes on top of its head, plus a third eye set between them. Fully grown, one can stretch past 4 inches long, roughly the width of your palm. Its whole survival trick lives in the egg. The pools triops live in are temporary. They fill after rain and vanish within days, so an animal that needed months to grow up would simply die with the puddle. Its eggs can sit buried in baked, cracked mud for years, doing nothing. Then rain falls, the pool comes back, and within days, those same eggs hatch, and something is swimming again. For decades, that Triassic fossil from Germany anchored a huge claim that Triops cancroformis is the oldest living animal species on the planet, unchanged since before most dinosaurs existed. Then in 2024, a team of paleontologists led by Geyer went back and re-examined similar Triassic specimens from the Vosges region of France, publishing their findings in the journal papers in paleontology. Their conclusion was blunt. Those famous old fossils cannot be confidently placed in the same family as the living animal at all. At the same time, geneticists studying the DNA of living Triops found something that does not fit the old story either. The genetic split between today's species looks far more recent than the fossils suggest, pointing to something well into the Cenozoic era rather than 200 million years ago. So you have fossils that look identical to the modern animal, and genes that argue the modern animal is far younger than its look implies. Nobody has reconciled the two yet, and the very fossils that made Triops famous are now the ones under dispute. What nobody is arguing about is the puddle itself. Rain falls, and within days, something with 3 eyes and 60 pairs of legs is swimming through mud that was bone dry not long before, running a survival trick that has clearly outlasted continents, ice ages, and possibly the dinosaurs themselves. Number 13. The frilled shark. In 1884, an American zoologist named Samuel Garman sat down to describe a shark that had come out of Sagami Bay, Japan, and he could not find a normal way to do it. The paper he eventually published was simply titled An Extraordinary Shark, and that title was not marketing. He had a body in front of him that looked less like a shark and more like something that had wandered in from a much older chapter of the ocean. Picture an eel that decided to grow teeth. The frilled shark's body is long, dark brown, and snake-thin. Nothing like the torpedo shape you picture when you hear the word shark. Most sharks breathe through 5 plain gill slits. This one has 6, and they are fringed, frilled at the edges like a ruffled collar wrapped around its throat. Open its mouth, and you find about 300 teeth arranged in roughly 25 rows, each tooth curved into 3 inward-pointing hooks, built to snag squid and fish and never let them back out. It grows to around 2 meters in its largest females, which sounds modest until you picture that entire length packed into a body barely thicker than your thigh. It lives deep, recorded as far down as about 4,900 feet, deep enough that 4 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of each other still would not reach the surface from where it hunts. Down there, in water with no light at all, it can carry a pregnancy for up to 3.5 years, nearly double an elephant's gestation, and the elephant already holds the record among land mammals. Somewhere in the dark right now, a frilled shark may be carrying young. It started forming before this video's topic was even chosen. Its whole body plan is treated by researchers as a living blueprint of what sharks looked like before most modern shark families existed, a design so structurally primitive that it barely needed to change. That is the living fossil label people reach for. Be careful with the number that usually comes attached to it. You will hear that this lineage goes back 80 million years, into the age of dinosaurs, and the broader group probably does stretch that deep, but the actual dated fossils we have for this specific genus are younger, from tens of millions of years ago, not directly tied to a Cretaceous ancestor. The primitiveness is real. The precise family tree is still being worked out. One detail outweighs any measurement here. Every photograph and every clip you have ever seen of a frilled shark alive was of one dying. They surfaced tangled in nets or stranded in shallow water, gasping in an environment their bodies were never built for. Nobody has ever filmed one hunting where it actually lives, 1.5 kilometers down, in total darkness, doing whatever it is this ancient shape was built to do. It has been swimming this planet's deep water since before most of the animals you know existed. And it has done it so far from us that we have never once watched it live its life. Number 12. The Solenodon. In the forest of Hispaniola, a creature about the size of a rabbit drags its long, flexible nose through the leaf litter, hunting entirely by feel, because that snout can bend and probe almost independently of the rest of its skull. Find it instead of a beetle, and it can bite you and pump a paralytic dose of venom into the wound through a groove cut into its own tooth. The same trick a snake uses. That creature is called a Solenodon, and calling it a survivor undersells the story by about 70 million years. Start with what it looks like. It has the build of an overgrown rat crossed with an anteater. Its snout is long and flexible, hinged at the base with a ball and socket joint, a setup found in no other mammal alive. That nose bends and swivels almost independently of the skull, probing into rotten logs and burrows the way a finger would. Its claws are long and built for digging, and its teeth sit near the rear of its body rather than the chest, a detail that marks it as something ancient rather than modern. An adult Solenodon runs 19 to 28 inches long, including the tail, and weighs around 800 grams, about the same as a full water bottle. A small animal with anything but a small family tree. In 2018, geneticist Taras Alexic and his team sequenced the Solenodon's genome and used it to trace that lineage backward. The result placed the split between Solenodons and every other placental mammal on the planet at roughly 73.6 million years ago. Sit with that number for a second. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs hit about 66 million years ago, so the Solenodon's ancestors were already their own separate branch of the mammal family tree, millions of years before that impact. And they were still standing there, venom-loaded, when the sky caught fire and something like 3/4 of the species on Earth were wiped out. They made it through. Almost every close relative they had did not. Today there are exactly 2 Solenodon species left alive, one on Hispaniola and one on Cuba. And between them, they are the last of a lineage that has now outlasted the dinosaurs, several ice ages, and everything else the planet has thrown at it since. Nobody can fully explain why. The general survival pattern after that extinction favors small body size, burrowing habits, and staying out of sight. And the Solenodon checks every one of those boxes. But that pattern explains a lot of small mammals surviving in general. It does not explain why this one specific, venomous, oddly built lineage made it through while the rest of its branch died out around it and simply stopped producing new versions of itself. Every other mammal that once shared its family tree is gone. Only the venom-loaded loner made it to the other side. A venomous loner is one way to outlast an extinction. Number 11. The purple frog. In 1917, a biologist working in the western Ghats of India found a strange tadpole clinging to a rock in a rushing monsoon stream. It had a sucker for a mouth, strong enough to hold its ground against water that could sweep away anything smaller. Nobody could match it to any known adult frog, so it went into the records as an oddity and sat there for 86 years. Whatever grew out of that tadpole, nobody had ever seen it. Then, in October 2003, researchers SDBU and Frankie Bossuet dug into the soil of Idukki district in Kerala and pulled out the answer. It was a frog, but not one that looked like it belonged on this planet. Purplish gray and bloated, with tiny eyes and a pointed, pig-like snout built for shoving through dirt to hunt termites. Their paper landed in the journal Nature, and with it came the tadpole's missing other half. The purple frog's closest living relatives are not in India at all. They live on the Seychelles, a cluster of islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean, thousands of miles away. The two lineages split apart somewhere between 130 and 180 million years ago, back when India, Madagascar, and the Seychelles were still one drifting landmass, breaking off from the rest of Gondwana. That makes this frog's family line older than Tyrannosaurus rex, which did not even show up until around 66 million years ago. It has earned the nickname the Coelacanth frogs, a solitary branch that outlasted nearly everything related to it. For almost the entire year, you would never know it exists. The purple frog spends roughly 96% of its life buried underground, invisible, only surfacing for about 2 weeks each monsoon season to breed. Males call to females from beneath a thin layer of soil, a harsh drawn-out sound closer to a clucking chicken than anything you would call a mating call. Once paired, the female physically carries the male on her back through the forest to a fast-flowing stream, where she lays around 3,000 eggs. The tadpoles that hatch are the same sucker-mouthed climbers first spotted in 1917, clinging to rock faces in the current until they finish metamorphosing about 100 days later. There is one wrinkle nobody has fully settled. The molecular dating that puts this split at 130 to 180 million years ago is actually older than most geological estimates for when India physically broke away from the Seychelles and Madagascar, generally placed around 65 to 88 million years ago. So either the lineage divided before the land itself did, or one of the two dating methods is off, and biogeographers are still arguing over which. What is not in dispute is what almost happened to it. A frog that survived the breakup of a supercontinent, that outlived the dinosaurs, that stayed hidden underground for 100 years after science first met its offspring, is now listed as near threatened. Its forests are being cleared, and in parts of Kerala, it is still dug up and eaten. Something that outran extinction for 130 million years may not survive this century. We are only 5 entries into a list where every animal so far has outlived a mass extinction, and what's still ahead includes a fish science got spectacularly wrong about being extinct, and a reptile that watched the dinosaurs both arrive and disappear. If deep time survivors are your kind of thing, subscribe now so you don't lose the rest of the countdown. Number 10. The goblin shark. Somewhere in the pitch dark of the deep sea, a shark's jaw shoots forward out of its own face, faster than you can blink, and snaps shut around a fish that never saw it coming. It is not a bite so much as a slingshot firing. Then, just as fast, the jaw snaps back into place, and the shark's face returns to looking almost peaceful again, though never quite. At rest, the goblin shark looks like something that was never meant to see daylight. Its body is soft and flabby, colored a strange bubblegum pink, because its skin is thin enough that you are actually looking at the blood vessels underneath. A long, flattened, blade-like snout juts out over a mouth lined with thin, fang-shaped teeth built for stabbing. Its tail fin trails off with no lower lobe at all, like something unfinished. Then the jaw fires, and the whole face changes shape in an instant. In 2016, researcher Nakaya and a team used footage of that strike to actually clock it. And the numbers are absurd. The jaw shoots forward at up to 3.1 meters a second, reaching nearly 9% of the shark's own body length. Nothing else in the shark world protrudes that fast or that far. And this is not a small animal to begin with. A typical adult runs close to 4 meters long, about the length of a small car, with males maturing around 8.5 feet and females around 11 feet. The largest one ever measured came in near 6 meters, putting a goblin shark in the same size class as a great white. Except this one has spent its whole life more than 270 meters down, in water so dark that eyesight barely matters, and that flattened snout, packed with electrical sensors, is doing the actual hunting. The species got its scientific name in 1898 after Japanese fishermen hauled one up near Yokohama and handed it to American ichthyologist David Starr Jordan, who had no living relative to compare it to. That turns out to be the real story here. The goblin shark is the last surviving member of a shark family, Mitsukuriinidae, that stretches back roughly 125 million years to the age of the dinosaurs. Every other branch of that family is gone. This one kept swimming through the asteroid impact that ended the Cretaceous, kept swimming through 66 million years of everything that came after, and never seriously changed its blueprint. Nobody has ever filmed one hunting freely in the wild. Almost everything known about the goblin shark comes from dead specimens hauled up in nets, because a living one, in its natural depth, is one of the hardest large animals on Earth to actually observe. A rare deep-sea camera finally caught one alive not long ago, and researchers treated it like a sighting of a ghost. That pink, flabby, half-finished looking body plan outlasted the dinosaurs, outlasted the asteroid, and outlasted everything this planet has thrown at it since. And down in the dark, it is still waiting for something soft-bodied to drift close enough for that jaw to fire. Speed built that shark's whole hunting strategy. Number 9. The chambered nautilus. Off a coral reef tonight, a shell is rising through dark water on its nightly climb toward the surface. That same basic design has been rising through oceans like this for roughly 500 million years, since before fish had jaws or a single tree had put down roots. Almost everything that shared the sea with the first nautiloids is long gone. The nautilus is still here. Pull back the shell and you find something stranger than the outside suggests. An adult shell holds more than 30 separate chambers, spiraling inward chamber by chamber like rooms in a house nobody visits anymore. The animal itself lives in only the outermost, largest room, trailing simple tentacles out into the water to feed. Every older chamber behind it stays sealed off, filled with a careful mix of gas and fluid, tuned by a fleshy tube called the siphuncle that runs through the whole structure. That siphuncle works like a ballast tank no other living mollusk has, letting the nautilus adjust its own buoyancy chamber by chamber as it rises and sinks. Its eye tells the same old story, where a squid or an octopus sees the world through a sharp-lensed eye. The nautilus looks out through a simple pinhole, an open chamber with no lens at all, closer to a cardboard pinhole camera than to its own cephalopod cousins. It is a design so old it never got the upgrade. The nautilus spends its days around 300 meters down, then rises at night to around 100 meters to feed and mate before sinking back into the dark. Straight too deep, though, and the ocean stops negotiating. Past roughly 800 meters, water pressure is enough to crush the shell outright, a depth close to the height of the Burj Khalifa standing on end. The nautilus carries its own breaking point around with it, built into the walls of its own home. That home has now outlasted almost everything. It survived the Permian extinction 252 million years ago, an event that wiped out something like 90% of life in the ocean. It survived the impact that ended the Cretaceous 66 million years ago, the same event that killed the dinosaurs, and with them, the ammonites, cousins of the nautilus that had once filled these same seas in far greater numbers and variety. Nobody has fully explained why one shelled cephalopod walked away from that extinction, while its flashier, more successful cousin did not. Leading idea points to the earliest days of each animal's life. Ammonite hatchlings may have drifted near the surface, in the plankton layer that collapsed after the impact, while nautilus hatchlings emerged larger and already built for the deep. It is a real gap in the record, argued over rather than settled. What is not argued over is the shell itself, spiraling through water the same way it has since long before there was anyone around to watch it do so. Number 8. Elephant shark. There is a fish swimming off the coast of southern Australia right now that is roughly the size of a house cat, and it has outlived nearly everything else that ever tried to kill it, including 3 separate mass extinctions that wiped out almost everything else alive at the time. It gets its name from the snout, a fleshy, curling proboscis that looks uncannily like a small elephant's trunk, packed with electroreceptors that let it sniff out clams and worms buried in the seafloor mud. Technically, it is not even a shark. It is a chimera, a cartilaginous cousin that split off from the shark and ray family tree around 400 million years ago, which makes it older than the dinosaurs by roughly 170 million years. Adult males carry something no other living vertebrate has, a retractable toothed clasper on the forehead called a tenaculum, used to grip a mate during breeding. There's also a rigid, mildly venomous spine at the front of its dorsal fin, purely defensive, inherited from a chondrichthyine lineage stretching back over 430 million years. Females lay their eggs 2 at a time inside tough, leathery, spindle-shaped capsules on the seafloor, sometimes called a mermaid's purse, and the embryo needs 6 to 8 months sealed inside before it is ready to hatch. Fossil relatives from 280 million years ago already show almost the same body plan swimming today, barely changed. In that stretch of time, this fish sat through the end Permian extinction, the worst die-off Earth has ever recorded, which erased somewhere between 90 and 96% of all species on the planet. It then sat through the extinction that ended the Triassic, and the one that ended the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. 3 planet-scale resets survived by the same quiet, plain-looking fish. In 2014, a team led by geneticist Merupa Venkatej finally sequenced its genome, publishing the results in Nature. It was the first cartilaginous fish genome anyone had ever fully mapped, and what they found made the living fossil label look like an understatement. Its genes mutate slower than those of any other vertebrate on record, slower even than the coelacanth, the fish most people already picture as evolution's stalled clock. Nobody has pinned down why this happened. Researchers can point to a small population, a long stretch between generations, maybe a sluggish mutation rate, but none of it adds up to a confirmed answer for why this one animal's DNA held almost still, while the rest of vertebrate life exploded into millions of shapes around it, from feathered dinosaurs to whales to us. Off Tasmania tonight, something the size of a house cat is still nosing through the mud, carrying a trunk built from 400 million years of near silence and DNA that ticks slower than any other backbone animal on Earth. A slow genome is one kind of record. The next entry on this list said a different kind, one with an actual name and, eventually, a death certificate. Number 7. The Queensland lungfish. In 1933, a fish arrived at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago for the Century of Progress World's Fair, shipped over from Taronga Zoo in Sydney. He got a nickname, Grandad, and a tank. And he just stayed there. Visitors kept coming back for 84 years. By the time he died in February of 2017, more than 104 million people had walked past his glass. Staff figured he was at least 86 years old. Then researchers ran DNA-based aging tests on him after his death, and the number came back at around 109. He had been alive before the Titanic sank, and Grandad was, if anything, the boring part of this story. Look at the animal itself, and it barely looks finished, evolving. Mottled olive brown, thick overlapping scales, fins that are fleshy, and paddle-shaped instead of the thin rays most fish swim with. It can grow past 1.5 meters long and top 40 kilograms, one of the largest freshwater fish Australia has. It has a single lung, which sounds ordinary until you learn every other lungfish species on Earth, all in Africa and South America, has a pair. This one breathes through its gills most of the time and only surfaces to gulp air when the water turns stagnant or low on oxygen. The name itself is earned by what comes next. Fossils of this exact genus, found across Australia, go back more than 100 million years into the age of the dinosaurs, and they are barely distinguishable from the fish swimming today. The wider lungfish order stretches back roughly 380 million years to the Devonian, the so-called Age of Fishes. That means this lineage was already old when Tyrannosaurus rex first evolved, and older still than the first trees on the planet. It survived the asteroid that ended the Cretaceous. It survived every mass extinction since the Devonian began. Gerard Krefft, curator of the Australian Museum, formally described the species in 1870, and the story goes that locals had already eaten one of his specimens before he got the chance to examine it. For something that has outlasted that much of the planet's history, its home address is almost absurd. The wild population is native to just 2 river systems in southeast Queensland, the Mary and the Burnett, an area you could drive across in an afternoon. Dams and habitat loss there now have it listed as vulnerable. Researchers are still working out how old wild individuals actually get, since most of what we thought we knew came from captive fish like Grandad, and a 2022 study is still refining the picture. In those 2 rivers, a fish built from a blueprint older than trees is quietly outliving governments, wars, and the people who come to look at it. Number 6. The lamprey. Picture a mouth that is nothing but teeth, a perfect circle of them, clamped onto the flank of a fish that is still swimming. There are no jaws behind it because this animal has never had jaws. Inside the ring, a rasping tongue works back and forth, drilling through scale and muscle, while a chemical in the lamprey's saliva keeps the wound bleeding freely so it can keep feeding. This is not some monster dredged out of deep time. It is alive right now, in rivers and lake systems across the world. The body behind that mouth is almost embarrassingly simple. No paired fins, no bone anywhere in it. Just a long tube of cartilage built around a rod called a notochord, the kind of structure most vertebrates only carry as an embryo and then replace with a spine. A lamprey keeps it for life, before it even looks like this, though it spends years as something else entirely. A blind, toothless larva burrowing in soft riverbed mud, filtering scraps from the water until one day it transforms into the biting adult with the sucker mouth. In 2006, a fossil turned up in the Witsburg Rocks near Grahamstown, South Africa, and the paleontologist Robert Guess, working with colleagues at the University of Chicago, described what it was: an actual lamprey rather than some rough ancestor of one, tooth-ringed mouth and gill basket already in place, dated to roughly 360 million years old. That is old enough to predate the first dinosaurs by well over 100 million years. This body plan has now ridden out at least 4 separate mass extinctions, including the end Permian event that wiped out something like 90% of everything living in the ocean. In the first 3 days after a lamprey egg is fertilized, the embryo does something almost no other backboned animal does. It physically cuts out roughly a fifth of its own genetic code, 500 million letters of DNA, and deletes that chunk from every cell that will grow into its body. Only the reproductive cells keep the full set. The biologist Jeremiah Smith and his colleagues, working with NIH funding, have mapped which genes vanish and roughly when it happens. But nobody has fully nailed down the machinery doing the cutting or why a lamprey solves this problem by physically removing DNA, when almost every other vertebrate just switches genes off chemically instead and leaves them in place. So the animal that looks like a leftover prop from a horror film is also quietly rewriting its own blueprint before it has a working heart, using a trick biology has barely bothered to explain. Whatever you think should have stopped it, it simply did not apply here. That mouth has never had a jaw to work with. The next survivor on this list has one of the strangest jaws left on the planet, and vanishingly few of them left to use it. Number 5. The gharial, a crocodile with a snout as thin and long as a fencing sword, lined edge to edge with needle teeth, spends its days basking by the hundred on riverbanks in India, largely ignored while it quietly outlasts nearly everything that ever shared a swamp with it. That is the gharial, and it may be the most understated survivor on the planet. Its full name is Gavialis gangeticus, and it is the sole survivor of a family called Gavialodea. That family shows up in the fossil record around 80 million years ago, in the late Cretaceous, which means it was already gliding through rivers more than 10 million years before the asteroid hit that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs. The gharial's bloodline is older than the event we treat as evolution's great reset button, and it walked straight through that reset and kept going. Back then, gavialoid relatives spread across Asia, Europe, Africa, and South America in dozens of different forms, some of them enormous. One South American cousin, Graphosuchus, grew to a genuinely monstrous size. Today, only 2 branches of that entire family survive: the gharial and its cousin, the false gharial in Southeast Asia. A third close relative, a large East Asian gavialoid, only went extinct in the last few centuries, hunted out by people well within recorded history. So this is not a lineage that simply faded in deep time. Pieces of it were still being erased a few hundred years ago, and the erasing has not stopped. Now, look at the animal itself. Adult males can stretch past 18 feet, rivaling the saltwater crocodile for the longest crocodilian alive, and their jaws carry roughly 110 thin, interlocking teeth built like a fish trap rather than a bite. Mature males also grow a strange bulbous knob at the tip of the snout, called a gara, after the clay pot it resembles. Researchers still debate exactly what it is for, whether it is a visual signal to rivals, a tool for the bubbling calls males make in the water, or both. Nobody has watched enough wild adult males to settle it, because there are barely any left to watch. And here's the turn. The lineage that survived the death of the dinosaurs, that outlasted 66 million years of everything the planet could throw at it, has lost an estimated 98% of its population since the 1940s. Dam sand mining that destroys the nesting banks. And fishing nets did in a few decades what an asteroid could not do in 80 million years. Fewer than 1,000 gharials survive in the wild today, most of them clustered along a single stretch of India's Chambal River. So the next time something is described as unkillable, remember the gharial. It survived the end of the dinosaurs. It may not survive us at all. Number 4. The horseshoe crab. In a lab on the Atlantic coast, a technician draws blood from a horseshoe crab, and the blood filling the vials a vivid, unmistakable blue. That is not a trick of the light. It is the animal's actual blood color, and it is one of the reasons nearly every vaccine and every implanted medical device made in the country has effectively passed through this creature's body before it ever reaches yours. Look past the blood for a moment, and look at the animal itself. Horseshoe crab is built like a helmet with legs, a smooth dome shell the color of rust, tapering back to a long spiked tail it uses to flip itself upright when a wave rolls it onto its back. Underneath that shell, 10 legs and a set of gills shaped like the pages of a book do the work of moving it and breathing for it. Despite the name, it is not a crab at all. It is a chalacerate, in the same broad family as spiders and scorpions, which is part of why its blood runs blue instead of red. It carries oxygen with copper instead of iron. That blood chemistry is not just a curiosity. The animal's blood cells clot almost instantly around bacterial toxins, and in 1977, the FDA approved a test built on exactly that reaction, replacing a slower method that had relied on live rabbits. Today, that test screens essentially every injectable drug made in the country, and it stands behind an estimated 200,000 pacemakers implanted every year, along with millions of hip and knee replacements. Now for the number that makes all of this stranger. In 2008, researchers examining fossil beds in Manitoba, Canada, described horseshoe crab fossils roughly 445 million years old, about 100 million years older than any specimen found before them. A separate fossil population from a quarry in Poland, roughly 148 million years old, looks almost identical in shape and size to the horseshoe crabs alive today. This is a body plan that has not needed a redesign through 5 separate mass extinctions. Trilobites had armor too, and they were shallow water generalists too, and every single one of them is gone. Nobody has a full answer for why this exact shape rode out 5 different global catastrophes, each with a different kill mechanism, while its closest competitors did not. So the next time you get a vaccine, or someone you love gets a pacemaker, remember what stood between that device and a hospital full of infections. An animal older than the dinosaurs, with blue blood, that has been quietly refusing to change since before there was anything on land to watch it not change. That blood runs blue at the surface. Go deeper, into water with almost no oxygen left in it at all, and you find something that spent a century blamed for a crime it never committed. Number 3. The vampire squid. A football-sized animal drifts in absolute darkness, blood-red eyes glowing, wrapped in a cloak of webbed arms lined with pale spines. Its name is Vampirotuthis infernalis, the vampire squid from hell, and for most of the last century, that name was treated as a literal description. Scientists assume something built like that, living where it lives, had to be an ambush predator. Look closer and the picture gets stranger, not scarier. 8 arms are webbed together into a dark cloak studded with fleshy spines called cirri, and 2 long whip-like filaments, not tentacles, trail out to feel through the water around it. Its eyes are proportionally among the largest of any animal on the planet relative to its body size, built to catch the last scraps of light at this depth. It has no ink sac, because ink is a trick for outrunning a predator in daylight water, and there is no daylight down here to hide it. The scale of where it lives is the real shock. This is an animal built for a band of ocean called the oxygen minimum zone, roughly 600 to 900 meters down, deep enough to stack the Empire State Building on itself and still not reach the surface. Researchers at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute recorded it surviving in water with oxygen levels as low as 0.22 milliliters per liter, a concentration that would suffocate almost any other cephalopod alive. It manages this on an unusually slow metabolism, essentially idling its way through a zone most animals cannot enter at all. For decades, that hostile address was read as more proof of a hunter, something that had adapted to ambush prey where nothing else dared follow. Then, in 2012, researchers Henk Jan Hoving and Bruce Robison, working out of Mbari, published a study in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B that undid the whole premise. Using shipboard specimens and in situ video, they showed the vampire squid does not hunt at all. It drifts, catching marine snow, the slow fall of dead plankton, waste, and mucus sinking down from the surface on its long filaments. It rolls the debris into a mucus-bound ball and walks it to its beak with its cirri. The vampire from hell turns out to be a scavenger, living quietly off the ocean's leftovers. Threatened? It still puts on a show. With no ink to vanish behind, it instead fires a glowing cloud of bioluminescent mucus from its arm tips or flips its webbed cloak inside out over its head, spines out in a defensive display researchers nicknamed the pumpkin posture. And this body plan is not new. A fossil record traces vampire squid-type animals occupying these same low oxygen depths back to at least the Oligocene epoch, roughly 30 million years ago, before most modern whale lineages existed, and before the ice ages we now think of as ancient had even begun. Exactly how long the modern species itself has held this shape unchanged is still being pinned down, but the lineage's address in the dark is not in question. Something built almost exactly like this has been quietly working the oxygen-starved dark for 30 million years, drifting, gathering what falls, never once needing the reputation it was given. Number 2, the Tuatara. 66 million years ago, an asteroid the size of a mountain slammed into what is now Mexico and ended the age of dinosaurs. It also ended an entire reptile order that had been thriving right alongside them, an ancient lineage called Rhynchocephalia. Every last member of that order died out, except a single population that happened to be sitting on an isolated scrap of land that would one day become New Zealand. That survivor is still walking around today, and it looks almost exactly like it did before the asteroid ever fell. It is called the Tuatara, and at a glance it reads as just another lizard. Greenish-gray skin, a low ridge of soft spines running down its back, a blunt, patient face. But it is not a lizard at all. Lizards and snakes branched off onto their own evolutionary path more than 240 million years ago, and the Tuatara stayed behind on the older branch, the only one of its kind left standing anywhere on Earth. And hatchlings carry something no lizard has, a third eye, sitting right on top of the skull, complete with its own tiny lens and a retina-like layer of light-sensing cells, wired straight into the brain. You can actually see it through a translucent patch of skin for the first few months of a tuatara's life, before scales and pigment quietly seal it away for good. Everything about this animal moves slowly. It keeps growing for roughly 35 years, the slowest growth rate recorded in any reptile, and it can live past a century. A male named Henry, kept at the Southland Museum in New Zealand, fathered offspring at the age of 111, older than any human parent on record. Today, only around 55,000 tuatara remain, spread across roughly 30 small islands off New Zealand's coast, a population smaller than a single town clinging to the same isolation that saved its ancestors. That isolation explains a lot. New Zealand split away from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana before the mammals that hunted rhynchocephalia elsewhere ever got a foothold there, so this one population simply had no rivals to lose against. What it does not fully explain is why the tuatara's body barely changed at all in the 240 million years since. Researchers at the University of Bristol built an entire study around that exact question, asking outright in its title whether the tuatara really deserves the label living fossil, because while everything around it, dinosaurs, mammals, entire climates, was transforming again and again, this one animal seems to have simply declined the invitation. The tuatara watched the dinosaurs rise, it watched the sky catch fire and end them, and it is still here, slow-blooded and unbothered on a handful of windswept islands, looking almost exactly the way it looked before any of that happened. The tuatara declined to change for 240 million years. One animal on this list declined for even longer, and for decades, science was certain it had gone extinct. Number 1. The coelacanth. In December 1938, a trawler captain named Hendrik Goosen was hauling in his catch near the mouth of the Chalumna River in South Africa. Among the usual fish was something neither he nor anyone on board could place, a heavy blue creature with fins that looked less like fins and more like stubby limbs. He set it aside for a local museum curator named Marjorie Courtenay Ledamar, who took one look, knew she was holding something that should not exist, and turned out to be right. The fish she had found belonged to a lineage science had confidently declared extinct since the same event that wiped out the dinosaurs, roughly 66 million years earlier. See it properly, and the coelacanth still looks wrong for this century. It can grow to about 2 meters long and close to 100 kilograms. Roughly the size of a grown man plus a large dog, built with heavily scaled, deep blue skin. Its fins move in an alternating pattern, one after another, like a slow underwater walk, because the fins are attached to limb-like lobes rather than simple rays. Its skull hinges open along a joint found in no other living vertebrate, letting the whole front of the head swing wide to feed. In its snout sits an organ that senses the faint electrical signals of prey moving in total darkness, which matters because coelacanths live in caves and reef drop-offs 150 to 700 meters down, far below where any recreational diver could follow. Its fossil record stretches back roughly 400 million years, into the Devonian period, before trees existed, before dinosaurs, before the supercontinent Pangaea had even formed, which means the animal that surfaced in that net in 1938 had been missing from the fossil record for a stretch of time as long as the entire age of mammals since the dinosaurs died, and unchanged in basic body plan for roughly 6 times that. In 2013, a team led by Chris Amamiya sequenced the coelacanth genome and published the results in Nature. They found its protein-coding genes evolve unusually slowly, and along the way, they overturned a popular idea, that this fish was our closest living relative among the fish, our own ancestor practically staring back at us. It turned out lungfish hold that title instead. The coelacanth's story is stranger than the neat missing link version, not simpler. Here's the part nobody has explained. This lineage survived not 1 but 2 mass extinctions, the Great Dying at the end of the Permian, and the asteroid that ended the Cretaceous, each one erasing the vast majority of life on Earth. Other fish lineages living in similarly deep, stable water branched and changed dramatically over that same stretch of time, while the coelacanth simply didn't. No one has found the genetic lock or the selective pressure that would explain why one lineage sat still for 400 million years, while the world around it kept ending and restarting. Think about what that means measured against your own life. Everyone you have ever known, every war, every language, every idea anyone has ever had, fits inside a sliver of the time this one fish has spent doing exactly what it is doing right now. It was already old when the continents still touched. It was already old when the dinosaurs were the new arrivals, and somewhere below the reach of any diver, in the dark caves off the Comoros and Sulawesi, it is still down there right now, swimming the same way it swam before there were trees on land to fall into the ocean it calls home, entirely unaware that anyone above the surface ever declared it extinct.